Hi, Sophia. Hi, Alex. All right, why don't we get going? I am not going to keep you too long today. We only have one topic that I mentioned the other day that I want to discuss with everybody. But first, here's how we're going to start. Stand up, name, and what is your pet peeve? What is it that might annoy you when you see it, hear it? You know, for example, one of the things that I just can never understand is why manufacturers package things in some kind of plastic packaging that you can never open without either a pair of scissors or in some cases it seems like you need a chainsaw. You know those types of packages, and it can be anything from a small flash drive to something this size, but they come in packages that are just hard plastic, sealed. You can't pull it apart, you can't rip it, you've really got to try to jab at it with scissors or with a knife to get it through. I can never figure out why they do that. So tell me what your pet peeve is. What is it that annoys you? Rohan?
My name's Rohan, and a pet peeve of mine is when you're talking to somebody and they want to get to a point, but they don't get to it right away and they just talk around it. Basically what I'm saying is that people, someone has a point to make and they just don't get to it fast enough and just talk around it to seem more smart than they actually are.
Good point. Ox?
My name's Ox, and I never thought about this, but I guess more it doesn't really annoy me, but the thing that I was confused on is I was just thinking because hypothetically when you sneeze, right? Either you have a handkerchief or you go to the bathroom, or you have a tissue. That makes sense, but what doesn't make sense, I know most people do it, it seems being better than using your hands. But the thing I don't understand is when you sneeze or you cough,
Into your hands, germs.
But instead of your hands, you then put it on your sleeve, right? So then, I know that's normally, it's better than using your hands. But it's because then it's on there the whole day. And then you go home and, for example, if you wear a blazer, you're not going to wash your blazer every day. So, and then you wear that, or, simple thing if you sneeze on your arm, and then you're trying to, open your door, and you have to put, more force, then all that's going all over the door. That's just a thought. I never thought of that.
All right, I have to admit that's not something I've ever thought of before, but please make sure that you don't sneeze into your sleeve while you're in class, because we'd hate for Ox to have a breakdown over it. Maddie?
I'm Maddie, and my biggest pet peeve is probably like when people complain. I don't really like people who complain, especially when it's like all the time every day. So, even though I complain sometimes, but they can be annoyed with me. I don't really like people complaining.
My parents used to have, both of them said this, they used to have a saying, they would always, if you asked them how they were doing, especially when they got older, they'd say something like, oh, what's the sense of complaining? But then they'd go on to complain for probably 10 minutes. What's the sense of complaining? I mean, I'm getting old, it's hard for me to see, I can't hear, I can't walk well, and it would just go on and on. Liam?
Man, pet peeve of mine is probably when someone doesn't communicate well with you. Having a lot to me, maybe. Both ends. So, yeah, I just thought of that.
Mm-hmm. Emma?
And my biggest pet peeve, I have, I have like trillion of these off the top of my head. I think top three. When people walk too slow, I'm very possible. It's very, and like when you're just in, I try to look around you, and then you're like all of a sudden you're right in front of you, and then drives me crazy. And then second one is when people drive right by. Like I'm one of those people, I like, give me some space, that drives me crazy. And then when I'm waiting for the shuttle and people see it like coming down the street, and then all of a sudden everybody's flying like to the like side of the road, everybody's like running to try to like get be the first person on the shuttle.
Mhm.
And crazy. Wait till it stops. Yeah.
All right, so let me get this straight. So it's okay for people to walk fast because you don't want them walking too slow, but they have to drive slow so they're not driving too fast behind you.
Like, I don't care how fast you're driving, like go around me or something, but when people just drive right behind me,
Mm-hmm.
it drives me crazy.
Yeah, and please don't slam on your brakes when people do that to try to make it a point because you never know if they're going to stop. And even though if they run into you, it's their fault because they're hitting you, even if you slam on your brakes, they hit you, so it's their fault, but you still have to get your car fixed. Jamila? Say that again, what is it? Oh, okay. That's an interesting one too that I've never heard before. Good one. Sophia?
My name is Sophia, and I don't really have many pet peeves, but my biggest one is when people like cough or sneeze in the car and they don't roll down the window. It's like,
Well, they don't need to because they have their sleeves, right, Ox? All right, Jay.
I'm Jay, biggest pet peeve of mine, it's too bad what's his name isn't here, you can get kicked out.
Way.
But when people talk about cars and they don't know the difference between a wheel and a rim, wheels and rims are not the same thing, the rim is the part of the wheel that you would use to measure the diameter or the radius of the wheel. Don't call wheels rims, bothers me.
I am learning so many new things today. Devin. Let's hear one.
How many people did I just call out by saying that? A lot?
Well, you know, I'm certainly not going to admit it, but.
My name is Devin. I have two major pet peeves. So number one, literally here in this state, I don't know why. People really drive so close to me, like the street saying, oh my goodness. No wonder the car insurance is so high in this state. People be getting in accidents all the time, and it really bothers me so much. So the second one is Amazon business too, but then when I was in the military, I was working distance. So I don't know why they put the smallest things in the biggest box possible. And I'm just like, why do you do this? You just
Right.
take a box, all the space, and or they just stuff it with styrofoam or anything else just with this one small box.
Right. That you then can't open unless you take out a pair of scissors. Right.
No, we just stop and talk.
Yeah. All right, well, Jay, again, I won't admit the whole wheel rim thing, but more than once in my life has somebody said to me, "You're driving too close to that car in front of you." And, you know, now most cars these days have the beep on them, the alert, so you get a little too close, and all of a sudden you can hear it going off. And there have been times where I've been in the car driving, and I'm on speakerphone, and I might be talking to my wife, and she'll hear the beeping go off, and she'll say to me, "Slow down," and she's not even there, and I'll say, "Well, it's not that I'm going too fast, it's the car in front of me is going too slow." Of course, it's never my fault. Daniela, pet peeve.
My name is Daniela, and one of my pet peeves is when people use like speakerphone in public and being really loud about it. It really pisses me off.
That's a good one. Tina.
Hi, my name's Tino, and I have like 2 pet peeves. My first one is like, when you make plans with someone, and then like that time comes around, and it just doesn't happen. That's like one thing that really irritates me. It's like, all right, I'm never hanging out with you again. And another one is when you're talking to someone, right, and they take a long time to get their point across. They go,
Oh, that's a good lead-in for the rest of the
Yeah,
class,
just-
Tino.
I don't know, there's something about that just makes me so
Mhm. Don't worry, Sophia, nobody else thought he was talking about you, even though he was staring at you while he was saying it. You know, I actually am a stickler for timing too, and I realize that there are times that our class runs right to the end, but if you notice, most classes around 3:28 or so, I say to you, we'll give them another 2 minutes and then we're starting, because my feeling is, on those days where we don't have to go 75 minutes, you'd probably rather have me let you go 5 minutes early than to have those of you who are here at 3:30 sitting and waiting for 5 minutes. So I'm like that too. I try to be as timely as possible. And there are times where I'll say, when I'm scheduling a meeting, I'll tell people that the meeting starts at 2:58.
Yeah, that's another thing that actually gets on my nerves a lot. It's like, guys, I told you let's go at 4. Why am I still waiting at 5?
Yep.
It's like another thing that really just gets me so mad.
Yeah, but if you give them an odd time, then they say, wow, that must really be for a reason that it's 2:58 and not 3 o'clock,
Yeah, but like,
or 2:55, yeah.
I always tell people show up an hour or 2 early. I'm like, oh, the party really starts at 4, but I'm at 2.
He said people, Sophia, just so you know. He wasn't trying to single anybody out. Youth, do you have any issues with Sophia?
I agree, and I think one of my pet peeves is when people honk on a family, like a red light and it just turned green really a second ago. Or when you stop people in the pedestrian.
Yeah. I had a friend in LA who was driving, and he was new to the area. He was driving on Hollywood Boulevard. He honked at someone, and he got pulled over by the police for honking. And it was somebody who was crossing the street, and he got pulled over for it and ticketed. Yep, honest. Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex. One of my pet peeves is also definitely when people flake on plans. Especially lately, I've been going to the gym with a lot of my roommates, and we'll like say a time, and a couple of us will be ready to like go from class to there, and then other people will be like not showing up for a couple hours, or like wanting us to wait and stuff.
Mhm.
So that gets me.
And then you get there, and Sophia's on the equipment that you wanted to
Yeah,
use,
yeah.
right? So.
And then my other pet peeve is I'm living with like a new group of guys this year off campus, and no one wants to clean their dishes. So like everyone will say that they're doing it and stuff, and then food will just sit on the counter for like days until someone takes care of it. But I just have learned that I can't stand this food being out for that long.
But nobody else here has ever experienced that, right? Oh yeah, that's every room, on or off campus. I'm sure we've all gone through that before. That's a good one too. Rory?
I'm Rory, and my biggest pet peeve would be when people talk food in their mouth.
Oh, that's a good one too. Because then what do? They then have to spit it out and wipe it all over the same sleeve that they just sneezed on a little while ago. Dulce, last one. What's your pet peeve? Oh, we've already been around. Oh, sorry, Jade.
My name is Jade. I don't have many things that like hurt me, but like one thing I'll say is like if you invite me like out, which is rare, so I'll just stay at home usually, and you don't tell me the dress code, because if I go there and we're all dressed nice, I would feel so bad. Or like I'm just overdressed and then someone's wearing flip flops, like you gotta get like on the same page. You know what I mean?
That's a good point too. So I'm so impressed that some of you have more than one for two reasons. One is that I'm just glad that you'll get up now, here we are 2 months into the class, and talk a little more than the first few weeks of class. But also, I'm like you, Emma, I could probably run a whole list of them. And, you know, Jay, you're right, that you listen to some of these and all of a sudden you have to ask yourself, am I one of those people? And one of the things that I do find is a pet peeve of mine, like you, Tino, are the crutches that we use. And what bothers me about it isn't so much when individuals use them, although hopefully I'll give you some tips for thinking about how to get rid of them today. What bothers me is, how did they start in the first place? Right? I mean, how did we get to a point as a society, as a culture, as a language, where people would start using ahs and ums and likes? Because ahs and ums, they're not even words. And so somehow it started somewhere, and now it really has become part of the language. And the likes, the you knows, there are all sorts of crutches that we use. And I have some theories as well as some facts about why we use them, and maybe some pointers on how we can get rid of them. But let me give you a couple of examples.
Greetings, my friends. I'm Lauren Sergi, and we are back here in the wonderful Microtech studios for another Talk Shop Q&A. Today, we're going to go over one of the most frequent public speaking questions I receive, and this iteration of the question is coming at us from Tamara, who writes, "Hi Lauren, I find myself saying and ah a lot when I give a presentation, and I hate it. It's distracting and makes me worry that I look like I don't know what I'm talking about. How can I stop those annoying ums and ahs? Yours, Tamara." Oh, Tamara, those ums and ahs are rotten little devils, and they plague a lot of people, including prominent politicians and well-known orators. Believe it or not, ums and ahs have a purpose. They're called fillers, and they're meaningless sounds we make up that fill in a gap in speaking while we think. Fillers are essentially our brains forcing our mouths to stop talking so we can think for a moment. Everyone, and I mean everyone, uses these fillers. In fact, according to a huge study by linguist Mark Lieberman, people say or ah an average of 2 or 3 times per minute. Now, I usually tell people not to worry too much about their ums and ahs, but if you're finding them distracting or they make you feel less confident, I have some suggestions to get you on the road to umless speaking. One of the best things you can do to reduce your ums is to slow down. Remember that saying is essentially your brain trying to give you time to think. Slowing down your rate of speaking will help your brain keep up and will help you feel less rushed and panicked when you're trying to put your words together. That, in turn, will help those words come more easily, and you'll find that the ums and ahs will dwindle away. The next thing, and this one can be tricky, is to learn how to shut your mouth and be silent for a moment or two while thinking. And I mean shut your mouth, literally. Start by observing how you feel emotionally and even physically when those ums start coming out. What's your brain doing? What does the sound feel like in your throat or your mouth? Then as soon as you feel yourself saying or wanting to say close your mouth and breathe in through your nose. This pause will give you time to think without filling the silence with unnecessary noise. This is a very deliberate action. When I first started using this method to get rid of my own fillers, it looked something like this. Him. One of the greatest influencers on public speaking and rhetoric was Cicero. He wrote his work De Oratore in 55 BC. It will seem clumsy at first, but I promise that with awareness and repetition, that act of closing your mouth and breathing while you think through your next words will become easier, and you'll be able to smooth out those ums and ahs down to a minimum. Closing your mouth while you think will be uncomfortable at first. Silence can make us feel anxious, and you might worry that people will think that you don't know what to say. But believe me when I say that taking the pause to think is actually going to make you look smarter and more thoughtful to your audience. These two simple strategies, slowing down your speech and pausing when you need to think, can make a dramatic difference in squashing those pesky ums and ahs. Remember, though, that you're retraining a vocal habit that you've probably had all your adult life. It takes time and practice to get this down pat, but I know you can do it. Tamara, I hope this helps you on your path to smoother speaking.
All right. Now,
One of the best ways to get your message across is to reduce the use of filler words. We all know what filler words are. We have them in every single language. You know, like, so, and the professional filler words I hear most frequently, kind of and sort of. These words literally tell the audience you're unprepared and thinking of the next thing to say. Now, there's nothing wrong with having one or two filler words here or there, but used excessively, they start to reduce your credibility. What's the solution? Pause and breathe. So while you're thinking of the next thing to say, close your mouth, breathe, and then speak. And you sound thoughtful and professional, like you know what you're talking about. So the next time you think you want to say a filler word, pause and breathe. Or if you're practicing with a friend, have them knock on the table every time they hear a filler. Then you'll know that you're doing it and you can pause and breathe instead. So close your mouth, pause and breathe, and the next thing you say will be that much more powerful and impactful.
so two comments. The first is, you'll notice that in both examples, they gave you the same advice. Pause, close your mouth, breathe, think about what comes next. That sounds like a lot. Pause, close your mouth, breathe, think about what comes next. But really, it's only a matter of a second or 2 seconds. It's not that that's going to take you 10 seconds to do all that and that it'll feel awkward in the conversation. We'll talk about that in just a bit. The other thing that, just to show you how some people do very aggressively and actively focus on these kinds of crutches, and they both use the word filler, and you heard the second example, she called them filler words, which I don't even think is accurate, since sometimes you're talking about and which aren't even words, they're more sounds. But I call them crutches because I really think that's what they are. They're something that we use as a crutch to help us get from one thought to another. But the beginning of my career in both nonprofit management and as a public speaker was when I went to work for Toastmasters International. Toastmasters is the world's largest organization, nonprofit organization, that is educationally based. And I worked for them out at their world headquarters in Southern California back just a few years out of college. And what they do, the way they train you as a speaker, is you actually attend weekly meetings, almost like a class, but it's weekly meetings where everybody has an opportunity to speak during the meeting, whether it's a speech that you've prepared or it might be impromptu speaking like we've done here. Everybody has a chance to speak. And whenever you get up to speak, no matter what you're speaking about, whether it's impromptu speaking or prepared remarks, and actually when somebody does a prepared speech, others evaluate that person too and offer advice. Anytime you speak, if you use one of those crutches, ahs, ums, likes, you knows, then somebody would ring a bell. One of these examples said, knock on the desk, have somebody knock on the desk every time you hear them. Somebody would ring a bell at these meetings, and then they'd charge you a dime. Now, granted, this was back in the 1980s. A dime still wasn't worth a whole lot then, but the fact that you had to think about, okay, somebody's going to hit a buzzer or a bell if I use a crutch word, crutch sound, and then I'm going to have to come up with whatever that amount of money was. And the first example said sometimes people do it 2 or 3 times a minute. I bet if you really listened, whether it's listening to yourself or listening to somebody else, you'll find a dozen a minute or 20 a minute. And all of a sudden, during the course of a 2-hour meeting, if you've had a couple of opportunities to speak, all of a sudden you owe $3, $4, $5 by the time the meeting ended. And trust me, when that kind of scenario exists, you do find yourself getting to a point where, and this is what happened with me, because I grew up in the Boston area, so I had an accent growing up. I said ahs and ums and likes, you knows. I used to say things like gonna, woulda, coulda. I still do sometimes. And so those are hard to get rid of, but it's easier when you start really focusing on it, because I have gotten to a point where if I say those sounds now, they really resonate in my head. And I know when I've done it. I know when I've said which once in a while I still do. So you really can't get to that point where you consciously say, I'm going to stop doing this. So why do we use crutches? We use crutches because the brain can process really somewhere between 400 and 800 words per minute. That's the capacity we have. So an average of 600 words per minute, but yet the average person speaks 150 words per minute. Now, you might find some people who speak a little slower. You will find a lot of people who speak so much faster than 150 words per minute. But if that's the average, if somebody is speaking 150 words per minute while their brain is processing 4 times that amount, that causes you to stumble. Because all of a sudden your brain's moving so fast that you have to try to catch up with your speech. And so you don't take the time to slow down because your brain is already way ahead of you. And so that's why if you can just get to a point where every time you want to use a crutch, every time you want to say or or like, just pause, like they shared in the videos. Just pause for a second, think about what it is you want to say, and then continue. And even if you know what you want to say, even if you don't even have to pause to think about it, just pause long enough so that you're not filling that void. And I know that there are times that people feel like I can't stop talking because I haven't finished my thought. And if I stop talking in a conversation and I haven't finished my thought, the other person's going to start talking. And so they're hesitant to pause. I'm sure, maybe you don't think of that consciously, but I'm sure that's happened to you before, where you've been in a conversation with someone, you've said something, you have more to say, but before you say it, you use a crutch or even just a sound so that that person knows you're not done yet because they can still hear coming out of your mouth. So that's the message, the cue to them to not jump in yet. You're not done talking. So that's why we do it. We do it because our mind is going way too fast for the words that are coming out of our mouths. And so we're trying to make sure that we match everything that we want to say with our ability, our physical ability to say it. And so think about it in any conversation you have. Think about it just in the next conversation you have after you leave here this afternoon. The next conversation you have, think about how many times you might use one of those crutches, and then how many times the other person is using it. So what do we do? The first thing is to recognize the issue. Recognize whether you're doing it or whether somebody else is doing it. I just mentioned some of the things that I used to do. I actually had this called to my attention because a lot of times we don't think about it. And you heard in one of the examples, they said, well, we've been doing this our whole lives. And that's why we don't catch it. I remember when I first went to work for Toastmasters, one of my jobs was to train district and regional officers, volunteer leaders around the country. And one of the first places that I had to go, now mind you, as I said earlier, this was based out in Southern California, so I had moved to Southern California back in the 80s, and one of the first regions I had to come back to was the Northeast region. And so I flew back to the Northeast. It was actually in Baltimore, but it was for regional leaders from Maryland all the way up through New England. And I went through the first training session, and at the end of the session, this one guy comes up to me, and he says, you know, you're a really good speaker and a really good trainer. He said, you're from Boston, aren't you? Now, they didn't know my background. They had no bio on me. All they knew was I was the manager of this department doing the training. But he said, you're from Boston, aren't you? And I said, I am. How do you know? And he said, because you say things like gonna, woulda, coulda. So that's when it really started to occur to me that when I speak, other people are evaluating me not just on the content, but on how I speak and on the whole presentation. And over the next few weeks, we'll talk about what the whole presentation means, not just the presentation that you write that you're giving, but your eye contact, your hand gestures, your body language. We talked about dress, we talked about words earlier. All of that, that whole package is something that the person that you're talking to, whether it's a conversation or whether you're standing up here in front of a class or in front of an audience, people do judge you. They evaluate you based on everything. And so when he made that comment to me, that really struck me as, okay, if I'm trying to train people, if I'm trying to teach them, and there are people there focused on how I'm saying things, if they're focused on me saying gonna, woulda, coulda, and that's going through their head as I'm talking, then they're not catching everything that I'm saying. They're missing some of the content. So recognizing what you do is a big part of resolving the issue. And then do it to yourself. Count the crutches. You don't have to have a bell or a buzzer. You don't have to pay a dime. But think about it. Think about it whether you're doing it or whether somebody else is. I was at an event a few weeks ago with someone, and there was a speaking program that lasted 75 minutes. There were 10 speakers at this program. And the first 3 speakers were all really good speakers. And then the 4th speaker started using the word especially. And she said it maybe 3 times in the first 2 sentences. And all of a sudden, that caught my attention. Because when you hear the same word so often, just in a short period of time, all of a sudden you take notice. And so I started counting in my head how many times I heard her say especially. 17 times. in what was probably about a 3 or 4 minute introduction of another speaker. 17 times she used the word especially. So sometimes it's not even the crutches, it's are you saying something, are you using words or phrases that will cause your listener to say, I've got to tune this out because it's the same thing over again. Or to say, I'm going to start counting how many times she says especially. But if you do that in your head, if you hear yourself using a crutch, if you hear somebody else using a crutch, and you think to yourself, okay, boy, that's the 4th time he's said like just in this one sentence, that will actually help you catch it in yourself too, and in your own remarks. And again, slow your brain down and slow your mouth down. Take time to pause. Take the pauses that you heard these other speakers say on the videos. It's okay to pause in any kind of speaking situation. Conversations with friends, telephone conversations, answering a question in class, giving a presentation. It's okay to stop and take pauses. And you have to be active about it. If you think back to the first couple of weeks of class, we had a session on listening and how there's a difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is passive, listening is active. And it's when you listen that you can start really catching the content. Because if somebody starts talking, and how much time do you have to catch their attention? Thank you. After those 17 seconds, Sophia, it becomes hearing. If you're not actively listening, if you're not actively participating in the conversation, even as a member of the audience, you start losing that attention. And so the same thing applies with crutches, that you have to make a conscious effort to be able to overcome these issues. And then finally, the reason why I put enjoy the results up there is that I have people who have said to me over the years, who have complimented me as a speaker. I probably do, just in my job here, not including classes, but just in my job as Vice Chancellor, I probably have, I want to say, 30 to 40 opportunities every year to speak in front of an audience. Sometimes it's students, sometimes it's alumni, corporations, people within the community. Sometimes it's just giving an introduction. Sometimes it's doing a keynote presentation. I've had so many people over the years compliment me on my speaking ability. Now, there's nothing that I do that anybody else can't do. Yes, I have some training, but all I'm doing is sharing information. But what I think attracts some people to the way I speak is the fact that I don't have the crutches that a lot of people have and that they're hearing in their everyday life. And when you do that, when you can get rid of some of those things, when you can change your vocal variety, when you use hand gestures, when you make eye contact, all of those things that make you a better speaker that really aren't that hard to do if you set your mind to it, people automatically put you at another level in their mind. Your reputation grows with them. And so I think I've enjoyed those results. I feel like people value me as a speaker. There are times that I get asked to do things that normally wouldn't fall within the scope of my job, to serve as a master of ceremonies at an event, or to be a speaker at an event that isn't necessarily something my area normally would, or the person in my position would. But they ask me because of my speaking ability. And again, it's not so much that I've had all this training, it's that I've had the years of practice and have made a conscious effort to put together the whole package so that that way it sounds more crisp, more clear, and that gives me opportunities to do things that I might not otherwise be able to do. Aks?
Just a question. Like, the only thing that I had a question on was like the word like.
Mm-hmm.
There are situations where, I guess to make your point, is it okay to use the word like? Because I guess like sometimes if you're making like a comparison, you may need to use it. So can you never use these words? Or are they more like, I'm trying to understand.
So you just asked me that if you're making like a comparison. You mean if I'm making a comparison, right? But see, that's just it. I don't know if you knew at the time that you said making like a comparison. I hear it just because of years of training. So, okay, let me go back then and start at the beginning with something different and say, there's no right or wrong. When you speak, when you communicate, your goal, and think back to what we talked about in the first class, your goal is to get your message across. And you can absolutely get your message across with some crutches here and there, especially because they're just common in everyday speech. So sure, you could get your message across and maybe nobody even notices. But if somebody notices, like the people that I was training in Baltimore many, many moons ago, if this one guy is sitting there thinking to himself, oh, I bet he's from Boston because he keeps saying gonna. In the time that it takes him to think about that, I've already said two other things that he just missed. So if you want your message to get across in the best possible way, then you need to think about what that whole package is. Because we all learn differently. And that's why as we start talking about things like eye contact and hand gestures and body language, those are important when you're up in front of an audience. Because if I just stood here like this the whole time, and if I talked in the same volume level and the same tone and just stared straight ahead at Daniela and Tino, and maybe I can kind of see Jay off to one side and Youth off to the other. You know, if I tried to do that for 75 minutes, none of us would be happy about that. And when you see me speaking, when you see me using hand gestures, when you see me looking around and making eye contact, it's not even a conscious thing that I do anymore. That's just how I talk. That's how I'll talk to you if we're standing here after class. That's how I'll talk to the chancellor. That's how I'll talk to major donors. It's become part of who I am, and that's just how you make yourself into a better communicator. And so, sure, you can use crutches. You can do anything because it's you. And if you just remember that your goal is to get your message across in the best possible way, from my perspective, cutting out some of the distractions. And maybe that's a good word for crutches and fillers. They're distractions because they will distract after a while your audience, the audience of one or the audience of 20. But they're really, I can't ever say there are rights and wrongs when it comes to communication. There's just better. And better really is defined by what helps you get your message across in the best possible way. So even that's a little subjective. Any other questions? Questions about why we do it? How do we overcome it? Tino?
I'm just like, it stresses me out. When I use the words like,
Yeah, so I've done this, I've done it in class years ago, but I've also done it when every once in a while I'll do public speaking workshops. And I always try to figure out, and I wouldn't do it to you, but I've always tried to figure out something that I could do to call attention to it, where maybe, see, and I just said, where maybe without telling any of you, I'd have a little piece of paper in front of me and have all your names down like I do for the attendance, and maybe do scratches every time I hear something. And then at the end, I'll say, by the way, Emma, do you know how many times you said like in this? I can tell you. I'm not giving you this to stress you out because of the fact that everybody does it. The fact that I just started a sentence with which, by the way, probably isn't even the first time today that I've done it. But the fact that I can catch it and think to myself, all right, next time, try not to do it. My message probably still got across okay, so to your question, Ox, sure. If your message gets across the same way, then that's your goal. But if you want to be the best communicator you can be, just think of all the different things that you can do better. This is just one of them. And if there are 10 things that you can do to be a better speaker, and you do 5 of them, 3 of them, you're already much farther than you were whenever we started. If you can do 8 of them, great. So if you end up, and I'm not even just using this class and the semester as the example, but if over time you say, I'm going to be better with making eye contact, then, and you accomplish that, that already helps you be a better communicator. So even if you don't get rid of the crutches, you've done something. And as I've shared with you a few times this semester, that's my only goal here, is to help you understand how to be a better communicator. I can't even say my goal is to make you a better communicator, because that's up to you. I can only help you understand how to be a better communicator. So if now it's in your head how many times you say like, maybe that's going to bother you for the next hour, and you'll curse me out and throw darts at a picture of me on first chance you get. That's okay. But if it helps, then it's something to think about. Especially because we have gotten to a point as a society where even though we're becoming more remote through our work, more work from home options, you still have to communicate. I have on my university, when I have my university relations hat on, I have a lot of web designers. And these are people who do nothing but sit behind a computer all day. They're not up in front of an audience. They're not doing a lot of one-on-one meetings in person. They're behind their computers. So if ever there was anyone who could say, well, I don't really communicate much verbally, they could probably do that. But yet we have staff meetings once a month. They have departmental meetings once a week. And there are times they have to talk. They've got customers. They've got end users that they need to talk to. And so even when your job is 95% technical, you've got that 5% that is still, I've got to be able to express my thoughts verbally. So if you can start even moving a little bit in a better direction, then any job you have, your supervisors are going to look more highly upon you the better you are as a communicator. Alex?
I just realized that the same thing can be applied in writing. Really, ever since you start writing, the teachers always say like, all right.
See? 2 ums, 2 likes, I counted. I know, but thank you for helping to make my point. No, go ahead. I won't count anymore.
I'm just saying that the teachers always say like avoid these words when you're writing. I guess the same thing should be applied.
That's
when
right.
you are, speaking.
But that's a great point. How many times when you're writing, do you write the word like? Do you write You don't. So why do we do it when we're speaking? And I'll go back to what I said right at the beginning about this as a pet peeve. I'm not bothered by the fact that we all do it. I'm bothered by the fact that somebody started this, and I wish I knew who that person was. Just like you get out on the highway and all of a sudden you run into a traffic jam and you get past it and you're thinking, wait a minute, what happened? There's no accident here. So clearly somebody at the beginning of that traffic slowed down and caused everybody else to have to back up. So who started this? Who started the crutches? Maddie, was it you? Okay. So you're right. You don't put it in writing. Why do we do it when we speak?
Honestly though, like in text messages, I like go back and like reread what I wrote, and the word like is there way too many times.
Is it really? Anybody else? In your texts or on your social?
Sometimes I like reread it, like that's absurd. There's no way I typed that out.
So I live on the seacoast. I live in Hampton Beach. So I've got, depending on traffic, anywhere from 50 minutes to an hour plus commute each day. And so there are a lot of times that because I spend a lot of time in meetings and doing other things that I have to try to catch up to email messages. And so I'll read through email messages before I leave the office and think to myself, okay, here are 2 or 3 or 4 people that I need to send emails to on the way home. So I'll get in the car and I'll start dictating, which, first of all, if you're going to do that, don't do it when you're on speakerphone because it never catches any words. So I've learned that, and now I put in my AirPods when I do it. But there have been times where I've just dictated it and then hit send so I can move on to the next one. And I will, when I get it back, when the person I sent to replies to me, I'll get it back and I'll see that maybe I had a in there, or that when I said, what are you gonna do about this? It'll come up as GUNNA with a red line underneath it for spell check. So I can see if you're dictating a text, but I think it's funny that you start texting and all of a sudden you find 3 likes in there. Tino?
Are there like other words we can use?
Are there like other words that we can use, or are there other words?
Are there other words we can use?
Well, why would you need to use other words if you could just say, are there other words instead of are there like other words? But, so let me ask you this. Why do you need another word? What's the purpose of having another word? Because why would you use like in the first place? And I wish you had an answer for that because I don't. That's just it. Jay?
I think maybe an answer to that is it gives you a second to gather your thoughts, because when you're talking, you're kind of like thinking out loud, I just was like, but when you're reading something that you wrote, like a paper or whatever.
Like a
you
paper.
More than 2 marbles, and then Noggin is gonna proofread it, and they're gonna think, oh, why did I put this word in here? Why did I repeat this word? Something like that. But as you're speaking, you can't take something back like you would if you're writing.
And that's exactly why the way to get around it is to pause. Because we do go way too fast. We talk fast, and then our brains are moving even faster. And so we do need to slow down and make sure that we're saying exactly what we want to say. That's it. You're absolutely right, Jay. That's it. We're going too fast, and we start stumbling over ourselves. And then we have to stop to catch up. But even though our brain knows we have to stop, we just keep talking, and that's where we start throwing in some of these crutches. And boy, we can have 1 million of them in any one sentence. And I know, we all do it. Now you've even caught me in it, so you know I still do it. So it's okay to do it. Aksh?
You know me.
Yeah, I caught that too.
don't pause as much to replace these words, it's probably because we feel that if we pause, then we'll lose sight of our next thought. So that can contribute to putting filler words, so that way your pace is maintained. I feel like it's one reason.
And yet, I don't disagree with you at all, other than it doesn't make sense to say we feel like we will lose our thought, because if anything, a pause will give you a second to catch your thought. Sophia?
Although I do agree it gives you a second to catch your thought, I feel like silence sometimes makes the listener.
Feel like they have to jump in.
I think that, or they just like kind of don't care anymore, like they lose interest. And
Right.
I feel like sometimes people use and filler words to keep the string flowing.
But if all you like heard me say was like, every time I needed to like say something to you was like, would that kind of like help you like keep your like interest? All it like does for me is say, wow, my head is just pounding with the word like in it. Tina?
Then another thing with the pausing is, I feel like every time I pause, they'll jump in, but then I'll jump right back in. So I feel like I'm always cutting people off when I'm trying to speak. Like, that's a thing. I don't know if anyone says that.
Oh, I think that's really common. I do that. I'm guilty of that too, where you're in any conversation, and especially if there are more than two people in the conversation, and you want to be the next person to speak, so you're talking to five of us, and I have something I want to say, and I want to make sure that I say it before Daniela says anything. Yeah, that's just societal. That's just behavioral. We all do it, unfortunately. Alex?
I feel like also, I feel also.
I feel like is, no, that's okay. I feel like is okay. Sure.
Also in response to what Tino was saying, listening closely to what you've been saying today, Professor, is,
Is what?
yeah, that you'll sometimes take more time to say words rather than potentially have a filler or like take a noticeable pause. Like you'll just take your time with one part of a sentence rather than taking a noticeable pause where people could jump in. So just lengthening how, like, I could have spread out what I was saying there instead of like talking really quickly and then taking a pause. If you know and you've practiced, you can maybe slow down what you're saying so that you can not have a noticeable long pause, but rather just take your time.
So let me ask you this. Do you think you speak fast?
I feel like I do.
Who would say that Alex speaks fast? Raise your hand. I don't at all view you as someone who speaks fast. So there's another thing that you have to think about as you're speaking is, and that's one of the things we'll talk about when we talk about vocal variety, is how is your pace? How quickly, how slowly do you speak? Yes, there are people who speak so fast that sometimes you don't even catch the crutches because they go so fast. So they're amplified if you speak slowly. But I really do think that your pace, you are at best, I'd say 140 words per minute. So I wouldn't even put you at the average of 150. And there are absolutely people here who speak faster than that. I'm one of them. I know for a fact that I'm probably in the 175 to 180 words per minute. And wait until you see me on caffeine. All right, so let me ask you this. Are you glad we didn't do this in the first week of class and now you had to go through the whole semester thinking about this? Let me go back to what I said to Tino. I didn't want this to stress you out. I don't want this to be something that bothers you. I want it to be something that you're conscious of. Something that you can ask yourself, do I want to improve on this? And to what extent? I am at the point that in my life where I say you know at the start of a sentence and I catch it, and it bothers me that I did it. But that's because I do this for a living, and because I've written a book on how to speak and how to not use crutches, and I still do it. So that doesn't mean that you can't. It just means if you want to improve, be more conscious of it. And see what you can do. See how many sentences you can go in your head without one crutch. And I bet over time you can work it out a bit more.
Is hum a correct word?
Yeah, sure. Because it's just a sound that you use to connect. You know, as Jay was saying, sometimes people use them to connect one thing to another, one thought to another. You don't want people to jump in when you're speaking, right? Several of you have shared that thought. When you're in a conversation, you don't, and it's easy. When I'm up here, I shouldn't say I know, but I assume that none of you are just going to start talking while I'm talking. Maybe you might. Typically, you'll raise your hand, and so then I know I can at least finish what I was saying. And when you get up here for your final, the same thing will apply for you, that no one's going to jump in while you're speaking. So that's when you should really be saying to yourself, I can take my time, I can say what I need to say, because I've got the floor. It's when you're in conversations that it's harder. And especially with multiple people in the conversation. And that's where I have my biggest fault. Going back to what we were just saying, is trying to jump in while there's a conversation going on, because if I've got something to say, and now you know me well enough that I always have something to say, if I have something to say, if I don't jump in when I think you're finishing, then somebody else could say something, then somebody else, and eventually, and I've seen this happen many times, and you probably have too in conversations, somebody will end up changing the subject before it gets to be what I consider to be my turn again. And I think that's part of it too. I think that's part of why we sometimes jump in to conversations when the other person is talking, or when we think that person is finishing, because I know there are times that I really want to get a point across about this topic. And if this person starts talking and then it goes to the next one, it might somehow change, and the topic might change, and I don't want this thought to be lost. And that is absolutely one of my biggest faults as a communicator. Any more questions on this, now that I've sufficiently stressed you out? And I'd love to say right now, don't worry, you'll come back Tuesday and we'll all have forgotten this and I won't even bring it up, but you know I will. Or somebody will. All right, Tuesday, we'll talk about the value of storytelling, and we'll explore how storytelling, even in everyday conversations, is an important part of getting your message across. Christine Caswell is joining us a week from today, next Thursday. Christine is a longtime friend of mine from BC. She heads up their internship program in the communications department. I just said in the communications department there. She teaches a class similar to this, where I've gone in to speak to her class last year, and I invited her to come here this year, and she's graciously going to do that. So she'll talk about some of the things that she has seen in communications, as well as when it comes to internships and the job market. So I hope you'll give her your attention next Thursday, and then this you'll continue to see for the rest of the semester. Think about your final presentation, Let me know if you have any questions about it. I would like by next week to have any requests that you might have for which day you want to do your presentation. I still have all 4 slots open. A number of you have already given me your request, but it's been pretty spread out. So I still have slots open on any of those days. And if by next week you don't pick one, I'll just slot you in if you don't have a preference. But I want to give you that option in case there's something that works better for you, given all your other finals and other responsibilities. Any other questions? Jay?
What's the 2-minute thing again?
So the 2-minute, that's goes back to what we talked about the other day with interviewing, where it's almost a cross between our interview and the impromptu speaking exercise that we talked about, where we will spend 2 minutes. So instead of in the impromptu exercise, I gave you a topic that you really didn't know what I was going to ask you, other than I did say it's pretty much related to either your theme or your midterm paper. And I just asked you one question, maybe with a follow-up. This is going to be more of a one-on-one talking about yourself, where I will ask you, tell me a little bit about yourself, or what are your interests, or what are your favorite classes, just so we can have a 2-minute conversation. Because I want you to get that expanded time. Most of what we do here is very quick. At the beginning, what's your pet peeve? For some of you, it's 10 seconds. For some of you, it's 30 or a minute, and that's great. But I want to expand how much time we're talking, because in another month, really, I mean, this first date is a month from now, a month from Saturday. So I want you to be able to build up to the 5 to 7 minutes. So no rubric, no set plan, other than we're going to have a conversation as if we were in a job interview. And hopefully that'll help you as well. And that's where I'd really love to hear you cut down on those crutches in that kind of a conversation. Because you saw last week those examples, the videos that we had of interviews gone bad, and sometimes that's a part of it too, if you can't communicate in your 2 minutes. All right, have a great weekend. We'll see you Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Alex, see you.
Do you want us to email you, what, whenever we do the thing, presentation, with the date for it?
If you want to email it to me, fine. If you want to tell me now, that's fine. If you have a preference. December 8th? Absolutely. Sure. Hi, how are you? Good. Class just ended. Are you back in your dorm? Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh, all right. How's mom? Yeah. good, thank you for doing that. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that's the important thing. Okay. Yeah. You mean our room? Mm-hmm. No, it shouldn't. Oh, that's fine, honey. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No. No, that's not an issue at all. I mean, typically, the only thing that will cause a delay would be if it's a delicate fabric or if it's a complicated kind of dress or something that they have to send out to someplace else, but it really shouldn't be an issue. I bet if I bring it in on Saturday morning, they will tell me that it'll be ready by Tuesday or Wednesday at the latest. The issue is more finding the time to get there because I have to check and see what time they're open, but you know, usually if they're open, let's say 8 to 5, I'm not there. Yes, oh yeah, you definitely could pick them up, but yeah, I'd just rather save you the trip if I could, but we'll figure it out. I'll let you know. I'll get them there on Saturday and we'll figure it out. So, quick question for you about Belfast. We are scheduled to go on Monday night. How would you feel about going on Sunday night and missing class on Monday? You can do that? Because we were invited to a reception in Dublin at the home of the ambassador, the US ambassador to Ireland. So, probably, I mean, the chancellor will have, and she always wears slacks and a jacket, so probably just that is fine. Yes. Yeah, yeah, it's not an, oh, that's nice. Yeah, it's not an evening gown kind of thing, but all the schools that are participating in the hockey tournament, like UMass Amherst and I forget Willis Brownick, Winnipeg maybe, but the leadership was invited to this reception, and so I said, well, then actually the chancellor and her partner are coming from Italy, because they're going to Italy to see some family for the weekend. And so Julie has to fly back to Dublin a day early, and Suzu will probably just come the next day then. But, so we'll leave on Sunday night and get there Monday morning, and then we'll have Monday to hang before, I think the event is maybe at 4 o'clock Monday afternoon in Dublin. So we'll still then the next day go to